الشيطان الرجيم اللعين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وأجل فرجهم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu, my respected brothers and sisters. Today we are going to continue with our lessons, and today is lesson number 14. Last week we spoke about materialism or materialistic worldview, and briefly we said there are a group of people who are materialists, meaning they believe that the entire universe, is equivalent to matter and materiality, which simply means that they don't believe in any reality beyond matter and materiality. And as a result of that, they do not believe that God exists. They do not believe that we have angels. They don't believe that we have Jannah. They do not believe that we have Nar Jahannam. They don't believe in a soul. Okay, so basically this is an ideology, and we spoke about their principles, their fundamental principles. Okay. Today we are going to talk about the differences that are there between this materialist. Remember, we don't have one material concept or materialism concept. We have different concepts of materialism. And therefore today, we want to follow the development of this materialism. And remember, my respected brothers and sisters, this issue of materialism, unfortunately today, more or less, it has dominated the world. Today, you see our astrophysicists, they are trying to discover the cosmos, the universe, and, you know, of course, I always say this, science is not for certain specific people. The way we are designed in nature as human beings, you know, we also have ways of acquiring knowledge through science, because science is experiment. And a human being, by your nature, one aspect of you is to experiment. So we experiment things to know them. How many times he's spoken about the senses we have? So these senses are what has developed into the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the astrophysicists, and all these different sciences that we have. Okay. But for those of us who believe in God, we didn't limit ourselves to only these experimental sciences. We also believe in metaphysical reality. So that is the clear difference between empirical science and then, you know, metaphysical sciences. That is the clearest difference. So you see that all those who believe in God believe that there is metaphysical reality, but all the empiricists, or let me say their ideas and their fundamental principles, opposes the existence of metaphysical reality. And having said this, I'm not saying that all physicians are faithless. No, we do have some of them who believe in God. Okay, but their principle, their fundamental principle, okay, opposes the existence of God Almighty. If you go into philosophy, what these great, you know, philosophers have spoken, especially the materialist, you know, philosophies, everything that they have spoken opposes what we call metaphysical reality. So today we want to look at their fundamental principles and then the differences that they have between them. Okay. So today we have two main ideas or fundamental principles of materialist worldview. The first one, we call it mechanical materialism. And this mechanical materialism, the founding fathers of this mechanical materialism is Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, you know, they say he is one of the brilliant mind that we've ever witnessed on this earth, okay? Especially when it comes to what the physicians talks about, his genius, how good he was, how intellectually gifted he was. And of course, you know, he discovered so many things like, what do you call it, the law of gravity and all that. He was a very talented young man, you know. At the age of 27, he has discovered so many things that today we still respect him, we recognize his contribution. So Isaac Newton is the founder of mechanical materialism. So in materialism, we have what you call mechanical materialism and dialectical materialism. And dialectical materialism also, the founding fathers of it is Mr. Karl Marx, okay, and his associate Isaac Engels. These are the guys who founded what we call dialectical materialism. So this clearly gives us the idea that we have two types. Fundamentally, we have two, what do you call it, materialism, two types of materialism, which is dialectical materialism and mechanical materialism. Okay, now let's talk about what is mechanical materialism that Isaac Newton came up with. Okay, so remember, we said materialism is about material concept, meaning that we don't believe in anything that is immaterial. Everything that we believe has to be material. So Isaac Newton, he was trying to discover or to come up with what was the beginning, how did the beginning came up. Because remember, every problem we have in this world, all the type of sciences, the knowledge we are trying to acquire, everything borders on where is the beginning? Where is the beginning and where will be the end? So you see that divine worldview says the beginning is God. Okay? We live in this world and we are going to die and go back to God. And when we go to God, we are going to be judged based on whatever that we have done on this planet. So divine worldview starts with God and ends with God. Okay, what about materialism? So Isaac Newton now wanted to find out where is the beginning? Where is the beginning? And then he said that everything that is in existence, there is always a force that influences the existence from outside. Okay? Existent by itself has some kind of, force behind it, which influences it for it to be able to perform its function. In other words, if you look at the universe, there was some force, external force, that influenced for universe to come into existence. So you see that Isaac Newton's idea creates this understanding that at all times there is another force behind, which creates, which causes the force to be able to perform its function. So you remember a few days ago we were talking about existence itself, and we said there are some ideologies that says that this universe came as a result of a theory. They call it Big Bang theory. And then they will say this Big Bang theory came as a result of certain shifting material particles, which resulted into this blast. And then out of the blast, we got all these, universe and everything that exists in this universe. So in other words, this universe came into existence as a result of a force which is outside the universe, which caused the universe to exist. So Isaac Newton goes on to explain that every phenomenon you see, there is always something outside that influences it for it to be able to be complete or to perform its function. Like for instance, if you look at human beings, There are certain agents, external agents, that helps us to be able to be complete, so that our functions and whatever that we do can be perfect. Something always outside, influences. Okay, so this was the idea that the materialists had for centuries, thinking that this mechanical materialism is the reason why we have this whole universe. But there was a criticism to say, if there is some force behind a phenomenon, then who created that force? What was the cause of that force that influenced a phenomenon for it to be able to perform its function? So now that became a bottleneck for the materialist, because now it's more or less like the way we are saying. We are saying that God is the influencer of the cosmos. So God is the one, as a result of him, everything has existed. Okay, but they are saying, no, God doesn't exist. But now, if you look at the theory of Isaac Newton, it indicated to something to that effect, that there is always a third force outside which influences. So that is why another idea of Karl Marx and Isaac, they came up with this theory, and they are associated that no. Existence is not based on mechanical materialism, but rather it is based on what they call dialectical materialism. I want you to pay attention and listen very carefully. So what it means is that this materialist, Karl Marx and his people, and all of us, I'm sure we've heard about Karl Marx in the 18th century. Karl Marx and his people, how they managed to, to create this idea. Of course, probably one day we will talk about what made this idea, especially atheism, from the school of thought of Mr. Karl Marx and his people, how eventually it metamorphosed and then, let me say, conquered, a lot of people on this planet. Okay? Of course, it didn't come in vain. Let me just chip in this. During the 18th, from the 16th, 17th century, the dogmatic nature of religion, where dogmatism was, ahead of everything, like this scholastic philosophy, when the Romans embraced Christianity and then they tried to introduce philosophy into Christianity. So this introduction of philosophy into Christianity somehow created some sort of dogmatic way of doing things. You must do this, don't do this. God says this, God says that. And then there were less privileged who saw something completely wrong with that ideology. Why? Because they realized that this so-called religion is giving some kind of favoritism to some and denying other people their right. So that is what brought the revolution, revolt against religion. Okay, so the answer we give to this is that, look, we cannot blame God because of the caretakers of religion. No, a caretaker can do things for his own interest, but we cannot blame God for what the caretaker of religion has done. Today, everywhere you go, people have doubts about religion because they are looking at the caretakers. If somebody is a caretaker and is using that, position for his own selfish interest, we cannot align that to God. Like we see people saying that, in our religious setups, the leadership, they want money. And then sometimes they say there is this God who wants money. So it's like God is the one who comes to us and he's taking money from us. God, what does God? God doesn't need anything. God is completely independent. Okay. Of course, we have to contribute to the greater good of the community in our, faith-based establishments. We have to contribute certain things so that we can help the poor and needy. But if it happens that a caretaker takes advantage of these members of this, associate, and he takes money from them, and then he uses the money for his own benefit. We cannot blame God for that. But unfortunately, in the 16th and 17th, 18th century, this was what prevailed. So it came this revolution of revolting against this religion, which is oppressing some people and then giving privileges to others, started spreading. And that is how these ideas of Mr. Karl Marx, became something that it is today, because they started questioning certain fundamental principles that was brought by this scholastic philosophy in terms of advantages that it gives to the leadership of these organizations and the family members of these organizations, where you will see, even if you come to Africa, we saw something like that, when the imperialists came to Africa. When they came up with certain systems that we didn't have that kind of a system. Like, for instance, in Africa, we had our leaders, our elders, our kings, and then everything was going according to the order we had. But when they came up with these principles of governance, whereby they will say everything belongs to the government. But the question is, where did the government bought things it claims it belongs to it? And now, if you claim that anything that it is listed to belong to the government, if you say it is not for the government, then you have to come to court to come and prove. Okay? So this kind of system made a lot of people to lose what they have. People lost their wealth, people lost their land, to a point where even certain privileges, where you will be told that you cannot go to school because you've not been baptized, where you will be told that you are born unclean. You are born unclean, you can only be clean when you are baptized. All these ideologies became a matter of concern. So in the 18th, people started revolting and started questioning God. Who is God? Does he really exist? And so on. So that is what metamorphosed into this materialist ideology. Okay. So Karl Marx and his people, they came up with this, dialectical materialism. And it's very interesting how Mr. Karl Marx and his people, they explained the beginning of this cosmos. Okay. Remember, Isaac Newton said something comes outside. So for them to defend that and to remove that aspect, because it has brought a lot of criticism on materialism, they said, no, there is no external force. So they came up with 3 fundamental principles. And that is what is written here on the board. Number 1, they say, principle of internal contradiction. Okay. I want you to pay attention and listen to this. They had 3 principles. Number 1, internal contradiction. Number 2, principles of sublimation or conversion of quantity to quality. Okay, in Arabic we say, kami ila kayfi, conversion, quantity to quality. And then the last of their principles, they say principles of negating the negations. Okay. Pay attention here. Let's start with number 1. They say principles of contradiction. Okay. Principles of internal contradiction. So Karl Marx said that there is no external moving agent that influences a phenomenon. Okay. When we say a phenomenon, what is a phenomenon? A phenomenon is, a situation, something that, happens holistically. We call it a phenomenon. Okay. So Karl Marx says that there's something outside that influences it. But now, Isaac Newton. And Karl Marx says, no. Isaac Newton says that. Karl Marx says that everything has something within itself, not from outside. Everything has something within itself that he calls them, it is principle of internal contradiction. These things, they are within and then they contradict each other. So you will hear they say we have what we call thesis and antithesis. It's like negative and positive that contradict each other. So instead of him to reject the notion of Isaac Newton, he said every phenomenon has internal contradiction. So there is this idea, they say we have thesis and antithesis. So this contradiction between thesis and antithesis result into what they call synthesis. Let me give an example. They say if you look at light, like this light right in front of us, the light itself that we see, that gives us this, visibility, okay, is as a result of two things. There is thesis and antithesis. So the thesis is the negative, and the antithesis, thesis is the positive, and antithesis is the negative. So there is a contradiction between these two. And then the light that we see right now, which gives us this clear vision, becomes what? The synthesis. I want you to listen to this carefully. Meaning that when this thesis and antithesis contradict each other, it results into synthesis. So the synthesis is not thesis, neither it is antithesis. So the light is neither the negative or the positive. So the light is the outcome of positive and negative. So Karl Marx in this part, trying to be clever so that he will remove any external force, he looks within a phenomenon and to determine that this phenomenon is as a result of thesis and antithesis. So the same way, like for instance, everything you see, the tree, it has thesis and antithesis in them. Even human beings, our development is the thesis and antithesis, which result into synthesis. Let me give you an example. Let's say, like those who are bodybuilders, when they go to the gym, they do lifting up and down. They lift so many times. So while they are lifting, the muscles contradict each other. So that is what results into the fatigue that you feel when you go to the gym and all that. So the muscles contradict each other. And eventually this contradiction results into the kind of shape, body shape that you want. So everything is thesis and antithesis. So that is the first principles of Mr. Karl Marx. And then the second principle, it talks about what we call principles of sublimation or conversion of quantity to quality. When we say sublimation, what's the meaning of that? We have quantity, and then as a result of this negation, the quantity eventually results into quality, which is smaller compared to the quantity. Okay, so we have quantity, and then we take out the quality from the quantity. So we don't have anything outside. It's just taking quality from the quantity. Like the issue of the light. The light is the quality from the quantity of negative and positive, which is thesis and antithesis. Then the last principle, they call it principle of negating the negation or dialectical nature. So that is the final outcome of their principle. So everything is based on negating the negation. Okay, negating the negation. So that is what they call it, dialectical nature. So whenever you hear dialectical materialism, what you are to understand is we are talking about negating the negations. So now Karl Marx and his people, they say that is the philosophy of this universe. We don't have anything outside. So for them, they were able to defend that negatives on Isaac Newton's idea, because they realized that Isaac Newton's principle had a problem. So when they came up with these principles, they said that this is the best, principles that we can defend materialism with. But can this also be true? Of course, it cannot be true. Let's look at the first one. It says that principles of internal contradiction. I want you to pay attention and listen to this. What is internal contradiction? When we say internal contradiction, it means within a phenomenon, there is always negative and positive. That they call it thesis and antithesis. Okay. So this thesis and antithesis is also a phenomenon. Thesis alone is a phenomenon, and antithesis alone is a phenomenon. So if thesis alone is a phenomenon, so do we have thesis and antithesis in a phenomenon thesis? Because that is what they are saying. And if we have thesis and antithesis in thesis as a phenomenon, then the division of thesis and antithesis, which falls under thesis, also must have its fair share of thesis and antithesis. And the one in order also must have its thesis and antithesis. So in that case, what does it mean? It means that every thesis must have thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis. And where does it start? From where? So that means that that principle cannot be defended, because thesis as a phenomenon requires thesis and antithesis, and antithesis under thesis as a phenomenon require thesis and antithesis, and in that order. So it will continue and continue and continue. So that means this cannot be a principle, or it cannot be a universal concept. We cannot accept that. And therefore, number one, that principle is abolished. We cannot accept it. Probably let me repeat myself for the last time. If they say every phenomenon within the phenomenon, we have thesis and antithesis, what it means is that everything came into existence, or every phenomenon is performing its function as a phenomenon as a result of thesis and antithesis. Now let's zoom into that thesis alone within a phenomenon. That thesis also is a phenomenon. It's like the negative wire. Negative wire is a phenomenon. So in that negative wire also we must have thesis and antithesis. And in that thesis in the negative wire, we have to have another thesis and antithesis. So the question is, where does it start? So that automatically indicates that this kind of principle cannot be absolute universal concept. Now let's look at the second principle. They say principles of sublimation. Sublimation, or they call it conversion of quantity, which is kabi, to quality, which is kaifi. To convert quantity into quality. Okay. Can this also be a universal concept? No. Because there are a lot of phenomena that we know where the outcome is not as a result of conversion of quantity from quantity to quality. Because remember, whenever we say a principle, that principle has to be a universal concept. And what is a universal concept? A universal concept is a concept that has to be accepted either logically, scientifically, philosophically, the same way. Like for instance, in this universal concept, we say human being is a reasoning animal. It's a universal concept. Every human being that ever lived on this earth, he is a reasoning animal. It cannot be that we say human being is a reasoning animal and there are human beings who doesn't have the ability to reason. So everything that is a principle, it has to be a universal principle. It has to be a universal concept. Now let's look at this sublimation. Conversion of quantity to quality. Yani how can we say that everything in its quantity, we can remove something that is quality from the quantity. In which way? Of course, there are other principles we can see that. Like for instance, when we want to extract diamond minerals, we will pile up the entire soil that is there, which is the quantity. And as a result of that, we will remove and pick the quality from the quantity. And so many other things that we can talk about. Okay, but this principle is not universal. Why? Because there are times where the quality that comes is not from the quantity. No, it's not. Okay, for instance, when we say a child that is born, can we say that this child, because he is from both parents, automatically he's better than the parents? No, we can't say that. Or can we say that? To say, no, this child is better than his parent. Of course, maybe there are certain aspects that we can look, but we cannot generalize it to say the child automatically is better than his parent. We cannot do that. And this clearly means that conversion of quantity to quality, even though if it matches up with the certain principles, we cannot recognize it as a universal principle. No, we can't. So another principles of Mr. Karl Marx has fallen flat. Now let's look at the third one. The third one says that principles of negating the negation, or the dialectic of nature, negating the negation. And how can this be a universal principle? To say there is thesis and antithesis. That also cannot be a universal concept. Because first of all, from the first criticism, we said that the thesis then must have thesis and antithesis, and then the thesis under this thesis also must have thesis. So automatically that is not a principle that we can be able to stand by, so that we can accept that indeed this principle is a true principle. And therefore from this point we understand that whether it is dialectical materialism of Mr. Karl Marx, or it is mechanical materialism from Isaac Newton, these principles cannot explain to us what is the beginning. It cannot. It can't. But how do those who believe in metaphysical reality, how do they prove the beginning? Of course, we have mentioned it time without numbers that in the intellectual principle, we have what we call possibility, necessity, and impossibility. And we said we don't talk about the impossibility because it is impossible. So we only have possibility and necessity. So everything that exists will either be possible or necessary. And what is possible existent? Possible is existence and existent that can exist and it cannot also exist. Like you and I, we are possible existent. We can exist, and it's possible that we cannot also exist. So you look at everything that is material falls within this possible existent. And then we have necessary existent. What is necessary existent? Necessary existent is an existent that it has to exist at all costs. It is necessary existent. And then when we look at, in the logical argument, when we say necessary existence, what must have the credential of necessary existence? Necessary existence must be independent. And we believe that our God Almighty is completely independent from anything. Necessary existence shouldn't have beginning or end. How many times we said? We said God Almighty, He is the one who created time. And therefore we cannot say there was a time He didn't exist, because this time itself is presented by him. So this clearly indicates that God Almighty exists, and he is the cause of all causes and effect. And therefore, whether it is dialectical materialism or mechanical materialism, it cannot solve the fundamental principles of being. It cannot solve. I hope it's clear, and then if there is any question or whatever, you can ask, you can type for us, and we will respond to the question. Do we still have time, or?
We take 5 minutes, so we still have 5 minutes.
We still have 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm just trying to summarize what we have spoken about, and also as I speak, if you have a question, maybe you want to ask, you want to type, you are welcome to do so. Okay, so today, from what we studied last week, we spoke about what we call materialism. And we said materialism is the idea that there is nothing that exists beyond the matter. Okay, and then we said we have people with that ideology. They believe that there is nothing that exists beyond matter. But today we spoke about the differences that are there within the school also. The school of empirical school. They also have two schools. They have dialectical materialism, and then they have mechanical materialism. So we started with the mechanical. Mechanical is by Isaac Newton and his associate, who believe that phenomenon always has something outside it which influences it. Something is always outside. Okay? And then we critique that if there is something outside, the one that outside also came from where? And then it means that there is another outside that brought the one outside to be complete, to be able to influence a phenomenon. And therefore, that ideology cannot be accepted. Okay. Then we came to Karl Marx and his dialectical materialism. We said Karl Marx said, no, we don't have anything outside. Everything is within a phenomenon. So he brought 3 principles. He said the first one, he brought what you call internal contradiction, meaning that everything has thesis and antithesis, which result into synthesis, and we explained that into details. That yes, the synthesis is neither the thesis or antithesis. It is the domination of thesis over antithesis, which result into synthesis. And we said that principle so cannot be true. Why? It means that the thesis alone also must have thesis and antithesis. And antithesis also must have thesis and antithesis. And those theses that falls under thesis and antithesis also must have thesis and antithesis. And where does it start? Okay, in philosophy they say something that continues without an end. If it is material, we call it is impossible. It cannot happen. In Arabic they call it muhalun. Okay? We cannot have a continuity of chains without the beginning. It is impossible. There must be a terminating point. And therefore, if thesis has thesis and antithesis, and the thesis and the thesis has thesis and antithesis, and the thesis under the thesis so where did it start? It means that it is not true. So the principle of the negating the negation is not true. And then we look at also what they call convention of quantity to quality. That one also, we refuted that argument from Mr. Karl Marx that even though if it happens with some other phenomenon, it is not a universal concept which happens on all the phenomenon, and therefore that cannot be true. And then the last one, which is the dialectic. Okay, they said domination, the principle of sublimation, conversion of quantity to principles of negating the negation, and the principles that negate. Of course, the first argument can also be used to negate this completely, to say no ways. So from this point we understand that dialectical materialism or mechanical materialism doesn't have any foundation to be able to prove the beginning. Always when I think about this concept, philosophical concept, there is one thing that gives me that peace of mind. Okay, and what is that? The physicians themselves, the astrophysicists themselves, they say that everything we know in this world about our world is not even up to 5%. So whatever Karl Marx has said, whatever Isaac Newton has said, whatever all these great men, these great philosophers have said about our universe, it falls within 5%. So with 5%, it's like you are just starting. And therefore, to come up with the principles within 5%, okay, and to think that these principles are universal is questionable. Of course, I know somebody will say, but if you are saying that 5%, including those who believe in God also, what do they know 5%? No, there is a big difference. We, those who believe in God, we believe in realities that are metaphysical. So we are not limiting ourselves to material concept to say that entire existence is equivalent to matter and materiality. We believe in metaphysical concepts. And because we believe in metaphysical concept, we are much ahead of this astrophysicist who believe in material concept. And within the material itself, to a certain point, there are things that exist billions and billions of miles away that we don't know them. And we are even yet to start scratching the surfaces of knowing those things. And that indicates that, for you to align yourself with the empirical science, the possibility will make mistake is much more higher than aligning yourself in metaphysical sciences. Because with metaphysical sciences, the chances that you are on the right path is higher than empirical sciences. So this is where we come to the end of this lesson today. And like as I always say, please, if you really want to understand what we've started from the beginning, try to follow up. Go to the lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3 until lesson 14. It will be very clear to you. You will understand where we started and where we are going. Our quest is to answer the fundamental question of existence. That is being. How did the being came into being? That is the question. And that is the problem of this universe. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.